So here's just a short message before we begin today's episode. If you enjoy this podcast, it's now possible to support it through Patreon. And some people have asked me about the practicalities of this. So what you do is you go to patreon.com/forestofthought, and there you can register either with a credit card or PayPal and some other options, I think. And you register to give a donation every time we post an episode, which is usually once every 3 weeks. And we've created or made 3 suggested tiers for donations, like 3 possible sums, but you can actually choose exactly which sum you like. And any sum, big or small, is deeply appreciated. And as a Patreon supporter, you get access to bonus material like extended episodes. And you also have our heartfelt gratitude and the knowledge that you're contributing to making this podcast possible. And if you are short on the cash, which so many of us are these days, just sharing the episode with your friends or giving it a few stars or a review on your favorite podcast app is just as valuable. You can read more about this on our website, forestofthought.com, under the tab Support Us. Thank you all again, and let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. I have a slightly different kind of episode for you today. Like a lot of people, I spent quite a lot of time these past few months thinking about the US and about American politics, starting with the protests over the summer, continuing on to the election this November. And although there was constant reporting on it in media channels, I find that reading and watching the news is a certain way of acquiring information that has a certain texture to it, and I wanted something more than that. So I reached out to 2 Americans that I know and asked them to give their perspectives on this summer and this election in the US to try to get a deeper understanding of what this means at a local and global level. So first I want you to meet Crystal Vance Guerra. She's a historian, journalist, educator, and community organizer who's lived and worked in Latin America for several years. She grew up in Chicago with a mother from Mexico and father from the States, and I met her when we went to high school together in Chicago. Her life was turned upside down by both COVID and the summer months of upheaval in the States. I spoke to her in late November from my home in Uppsala while she was in her colorful room in her family's home in South Chicago. So you were telling me just before that you actually moved back to Chicago now because of COVID. So this is a recent move.
Yeah, I was, working this place called Guanaja. It's an island off the Caribbean coast of Honduras. And I just came to visit my family because it had been over a year since I had been back to Chicago. And less than a week after I came, all the shutdowns started to happen. And this island in particular shut down because it is an island and because they don't have a hospital or social services like that. It was particularly closed off. So, yeah, it's, I think, for all of us, right, that moment of reflection that we now have, this 2020 perspective that we wouldn't have had without this global moment that we're in. Because we often go through things, either individually or as a nation or as part of some identity. Right?
Yeah.
But now this is just a global thing.
Yeah, exactly. How has it been since you've been back? Because I follow you when I've been following you on social media and stuff. It looks like you've been pretty active also in your community.
Yeah, I'm also an organizer. That's something that's been with me since adolescence, I guess, as well. And it started in high school, along the same time that I met you. I would say, yeah, coming back to the States, I that wasn't really my intention, even though that was really what I was involved in when I left the first time. And it's the circumstance of what happened in April, May, June, July, just every, beginning with Ahmaud Arbery, to George Floyd, to Breonna Taylor, to Vanessa Guillen, to, the whole long list of people. And this list is one that, we've had going. The last time I was in Chicago basically was the first moment of Black Lives Matter in 2015. And so found myself again in a moment, and this time, because of Corona, it also became more of a global moment of reflection on race and the structures that operate in this world. And so, yeah, I mean, I was a little bit upset. I am upset because that's not how I wanted to spend my summer, right? That's not how any of us want to spend our summers, yelling or trying to plan things or being worried about police or, spending all this extra energy on top of coronavirus, right? On top of the normal, well, not normal, but now normal stress that we have, with the, worrying about how Black and Latino communities are being, more impacted by COVID. And I was doing writing and I was trying to focus on like this art part of me. And then, there's a duty almost or I feel a duty to do something. And in my neighborhood, which is a Black and brown neighborhood where, it's like these discrepancies play out in real time and very visibly. There is a duty aspect that I feel. And it's probably also related to me as a historian. Right? I just can see the history of it and I know that there's a role that we all play in it. And so that's what I was trying to do this summer and continue to do, though now it's cold, so it's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, could you say a little bit more about your community in Chicago? And it'd be interesting to hear as well what you're seeing in terms of these discrepancies that you were describing, and how if and how COVID has sort of brought to light some of those issues that have been more long term.
Yeah, it's all one could say that's that is all history, right? It's struggle. There's some people who could think about history in that way. And so in a way it is continuous, right? And it just grows. So in 2015, let's say that organizing hadn't come to my neighborhood. I wasn't really living here either, but citywide organizing hadn't come here. My neighborhood is called South Chicago, kind of a boring name. It's located in the south side of Chicago, but its actual former name is South Chicago. And this is or was the steel producing center of the US, right? So over 60% and 70% of all the steel produced in the US was produced here in this neighborhood. This neighborhood right down my block, 3 blocks down, is where the Sears Tower was built, right? One of the iconic buildings of Chicago skyline, the Hancock, the whole skyline, right? And this whole concept of Chicago as this modern city came out of this neighborhood, came out of this working class, neighborhood, at the edge of the lake, at the edge of a river, right? Because of all the transportation to move steel throughout the U.S. And so anyway, as things changed, economically, as things became more global, all the steel mills shut down in my neighborhood, leading to a depression. Not that they were very good for us anyway, considering all the contamination. And so since then, my neighborhood has been in this rut, right? It's not an industrial center. It's not in anything. And it, faced the recession of 2008 very, it was felt very, very strongly here. There's still, my block, for example, has 4 empty homes still, right? These homes, people displaced, people, foreclosures, haven't been recovered. Kind of maybe what is happening with businesses now, right? And a lot of businesses, then they're not going to come back. And the people, the banks or the structures that we haven't made it possible for people to come back either. So this is the condition of my neighborhood. And this summer was interesting because despite these conditions of inequality in my neighborhood in, a first world country, there's never been any organizing or not much. And this summer, as you kind of saw throughout the US, it's like something snapped. And people are just like, but why? Why? Why is this like this? Why are things the way they are? And there's a combination there that has to do with COVID, to take it back to your question, right? Where people were unemployed, out of school. What else? No social services being provided by the government. As you know, there's only been one relief check that was sent out. Only one. And so people are struggling. And it just became a situation of nothing left to lose. And that is when you have your most potential also for pushing, for really challenging the status and the system, because it left people with nothing. And so when you have nothing to lose, right? Yeah. Then you can go all out. And so I think that's part of what we saw, plus the history, right? Because to get all history nerd on you.
Please do, yeah.
This isn't new, right? So I reference back to 2015, but in the 50s, in 1951, a group in Chicago of Black youth and Black organizers took this report called We Charge Genocide to the United Nations to talk about police brutality. And all it is just lists of cases, right? May, June, just lists of cases. And as I show you in this book. And so We Charge Genocide was 1951. And then this same report was published in 2015. And the youth from Chicago during that moment of organizing went again to the Human Rights Council of the UN and presented an updated report under the same title, We Charge Genocide. And then again, 5 years later, right? And it gets a little bit, that fury builds up because there is a documented history. And so that was, and given everything, given COVID, again, we're not COVID giving us this time to reflect and this time to engage. So oftentimes we survive through work. We're working all the time, and then that occupies, but now there's no work and there's no way to survive, but to actually defend life. And that's what I saw happen this summer.
Yeah. Do you feel like for people in South Chicago, what is it that's really important for people? Is it racial justice? Is it also just access to jobs, to social services, to healthcare, to the possibility of living a good life?
Yeah, all of the above, right? I think it sounds kind of silly, but almost the first thing and the first demand is just a recognition that this is the situation.
Interesting.
And that hasn't been afforded, right? Because we've had to write that same report about 3 times now. Yeah. And they're still wondering, is there police brutality? is that an issue? Should we restructure our police departments? And instead, they've just become more funded across the years, no matter how many reports or things are written. And so just that basic, and a lot of the rage stems from that, right? If there is things in, I think, you know, living in this country and living as a, you know, marginalized community, being part of one, there's that, you know, of course there's opportunity. Of course there's things here that don't exist, right? And if I look, you know, where I've lived in Mexico or where I've lived in Honduras and look to my family and I look to my friends, and yeah, of course, yes, there's opportunity. There's things that the injustices and the ways things are very frustrating in other places. And then, but there's this recognition that needs to happen here in the States that hasn't happened. And so then there's the other side, right? Maybe we don't have it as bad, quote unquote, as other places facing injustice or systemic inequalities.
Yeah.
But then we can look to other countries and say to the more programming or what you were referencing in terms of healthcare or access or opportunity or education, we can look at other countries and say, look, it is possible. You can't tell us this isn't possible anymore, right?
Yeah.
And you can't also say, right, it's because our race or it's because our gender, it's because our whatever identity, because we're past that moment as well. Yeah. In history, I didn't know why we ever had to surpass that moment, but we're past it, thankfully. And so, yeah, there's this moment of where we have it on both sides, you know, where we're grateful, but we also understand that we have this because of the exploitation of the world and because of the exploitation of our communities. Yeah. That's the only reason why we have the comforts that we do. So if we're honest and if we're looking at it, then, you know, this concept of none are free until all are free resonates even more. And we realize that, you know, whatever little crumbs or little bits of comfort that we get aren't enough because it's still part of this system. And so the principles that I think that has really been interesting over the summer, that is, we can talk about this more, but I'm just going to lay it out here, is the concept of abolition as a guiding principle and ethic in how we move forward.
Yeah, talk a bit more about that. What do you mean?
So with abolition, again, to take it back to the history, when we think of abolition in the States, we link it to the emancipation of those enslaved. We link it back to the abolitionist movement, because it was a movement, right, that also confronted a system of slavery, of enslavement, and for the most part, yeah, eradicated it. Except that if you look at our Constitution and at the amendment that ended slavery, there is a little condition there. It says, except in cases of punishment. And so slavery is abolished in this country, except in cases of punishment. Written into the Constitution, meaning that slavery is still legal in this country as a punishment. And so if we look at, you know, the U.S. having the both numerically and percentage-wise incarcerated population of the world, when we look at how we treat undocumented people or people, refugees, asylum seekers, when we look at how we treat people looking for a solution to survive, it's all punishment, right? And the way policing approaches people and communities is through a punitive or punishment lens. And so we're never going to get anywhere until this project of abolition is fulfilled. And I think this, as we we notice that there are certain systems and certain concepts that need to be uprooted in order to move forward, in order to create a better country, right? A better world, a better world.
You were saying that there hasn't been a lot of community organizing in your community until recently, actually. These past 4 years especially, but the past few years in the States have been very polarizing. And at the same time, you've seen a lot more, or it seems like there's been a lot more grassroots organizing, or a lot more people being engaged in politics. Does that make you feel hopeful in terms of the work that is being done where you live?
Yes. Short answer, yes. There is, every generation becomes more multi-ethnic, more multicultural, more mobile, right? We've become more connected. And so there is this aperture of, again, why are things the way they are here or there, or we can connect and I think there just naturally things are happening with the youth that are making them quote unquote more progressive. But I would just say, we're realizing that certain things about life need to be defended, right? And need to be upheld. And so I do feel hopeful because it is the youth, right? And I think it's this frustration that we're seeing, right? That there isn't this recognition, no matter how long it's said, because these things are very obvious. And whether it be environmental stuff, whether it be racial, whether it be gender, it's just absurd. We can have a million studies and we're still talking about it. And there's a frustration built up. Because we realize we're also getting to a point as a world, right, where we can't continue in the same. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about how we produce things. We're talking about how we function as a world. We're getting to that limit anyway. And there's there's this moment of crisis that we have to confront how we're operating. And I think, that's happening as each generation. It's like, why are these things the way they are? And more and more of that confrontation. So I am hopeful. I am also, Biden won by 5 million votes or so. I wasn't so shocked, but I've heard other people saying like, oh, we thought it was going to be more clear winner, right?
Yeah.
Less of this murky, like, oh, just 5 million votes. It's not even Honduras, right? That's an issue. And a lot of those people are young people too, and so I can't make those big generalizations either, though I see it in my own neighborhood or though I see it within my own communities.
What do you think, or what do you think is at the heart of so many people voting for another 4 years of Trump, even though, a lot of people have been extremely unhappy with his presidency?
Unhappy and hurt.
Yeah.
Tangibly hurt, right? When I can see unhappiness or disagreement is one thing, but when you see people voting against their own interests, materially, economically, everything, when you have that voting against your own interests happening, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And you have to, like, what is going on, right? For people to really say, I don't want healthcare.
Yeah.
Or I don't think everyone should have equal access to education.
Yeah.
I believe, whatever, innumerable things, I believe children should be separated at the border. So these become hard things for me to understand of others. And there's people in power like Trump who I don't give much compassion to, but it is the people who are voting against their own interests that with this framing of abolition, because it's not just an uprooting, but it's a presence. Like, how can we create the world that we want to, whatever, utopic, whatever, but we always have to keep striving for it, right? I know you can never really achieve it, but that's why we have to keep working towards it. But there's this approach with compassion, and there's this approach that, no one is expendable. Maybe there's a couple of people that the world would be better without, but in general, no one is expendable. and if we're actually going to get anywhere, we must bring people in, right? Or else we're always just going to be this back and forth, like rubber banding, like every 4 years, every 8 years, like healthcare, no healthcare, no healthcare. I don't know. It's and so I try to approach it with compassion and understand the history, which is why having this long view of why things are becomes very important in movement work. Because back in the day, right, when we were with the original abolitionist movement, white people in this country, white men in this country, were given land and money. Those who didn't have land, who didn't have money, who were, either servants or indentured servants or other, there was many forms of servitude. And it was that color line was encouraged and was deliberately drawn with property and money and citizenship. And so there's this history of pitting communities against each other, right? Divide and conquer. It's nothing new, because race, it's been used as a tool. How can you get people to vote against their own class or against their own interests? As a very human, like that is, and to go against someone just because of color of skin and not notice all that we're in the same position. That's a lot of psychological work. And I hope that as we begin to satisfy the basic needs, conditions for survival, such as having healthcare, such as having equal access to education, naturally that defensiveness of this is mine and I must defend it because whatever fake thing, right? Because I am a real American, unlike those people, then we can really get somewhere. But it's interesting, this, needing that, the basics, home, food, these basic things that we don't actually have in the U.S.
That's kind of a precondition
alleviate
for
some of that. Yeah, it might alleviate, because there is a lot of this, oh, they're taking my job, right? Oh, they don't actually work. Or why should I pay for someone else's health care if I don't even have health care? But that's the thing, we can all have health care. Or we can all have education, or we can all have these things. Yeah,
because it does feel like in a that's what's interesting about the States, because in a situation where so many people are faced with just real economic hardship and kind of disintegration of their communities, if you kind of look at, I don't know, whether it's, farming communities in Iowa or wherever people are really struggling, and often those people would be interested in those things that you just mentioned, like these basic forms of security, and instead we're seeing the opposite in a way. And that's also interesting in terms of what I've been seeing from kind of over here is like this, there's a discussion on race happening, but not as much this discussion on the economic aspects of it, and just sort of the dynamics that are inherent in capitalism, sort of, and how people are also like, it's bad to be poor. You're going to be at a big disadvantage, and then being poor and Black or brown is going to be even harder. And that also, I sometimes wonder what things would look like in the States if Black and brown people were not disproportionately poor. What face would racism then have in the States? Like, what would it look like, and would we be seeing other kinds of problems because it does feel like there's a lot of things that that poor people, no matter their race, could unite around, but that we're not seeing that happening as much, or maybe it is happening.
You know, the U.S. is a very segregated place.
Yeah.
So it's hard for those connections and for those, you know, like in this time of mutual aid, right? Because we are in a time of mutual aid, given the chaos in the White House and of our government. People are developing really strong mutual aid networks. And I would say in these cities where you have more diversity, those still segregated, right? We're segregated by neighborhoods, but we're mixed as a city, integrated as a city. There is a lot of this stuff is being worked through via mutual aid, via this.
So mutual aid, you mean
rely on each other.
You mean mutual aid is kind of people helping each other out in different ways,
exactly,
at a community level.
Yes. So either creating networks of food distribution, or during the summer when there was a lot of protesting, creating like safe ride systems for people coming out of protests or going through certain neighborhoods that are very racist, for lack of a better any other way to say it. So creating these systems, so mutual aid in many ways, but yes, that direct aid, that community connection, because as we say, or the concept has developed over the summer, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe, right? And we got us. So obviously, history has shown us, you know, this is not, people are treated as expendable in this country. So those are the mutual aid networks. But you know, if you live in all white community, you're not going to see that, or in an all whatever community, which do exist in the United States. We have, you know, my neighborhood is 98% Black and Latino, and there are other neighborhoods that are 98% white, and that's just how the U.S. is set up, even by states, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it goes hand in hand, as you were saying, right? This capitalist structure, right? How the U.S. got developed. Okay, where did the money come from? Through slavery, right? You didn't have to pay your workers for over 100 years. That's great. Didn't have to pay any of the land. Just took it, killed everyone. Didn't, you know, you can really amass capital in this way, and so there's an obvious link between the rise of the U.S. and its role in shaping capitalism and race and racism and white supremacy that needs to be addressed. But it is amazing to see the inability for people to vote along their class, given we've had this whole history of race and discussions about this for hundreds of years now, for 150 years now.
Yeah.
Hope we would be past it as well.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because it also brings up this thing of identity politics and what happens if people are. I wonder also if that is something that helps or does not help this. That thing that it encourages people to not think class, but rather think their identity, and then people think, well, my identity is white, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, it's interesting because that I hadn't thought about that, but I think a lot of the quote unquote conservative or right narrative says we don't believe in identity politics.
Right.
All these identities coming up affirming their right to exist. They don't believe it, but they are the ones who most subscribe to this identity of America as a white nation, of the South as a Confederate stronghold, of, you know, certain whether it be gender norms, sexuality norms, religious norms. There is this strong and why people support Trump kind of just because of identity, right? I think on within, Black and brown communities, there's been a real reflection on identity politics and the limits of it. That representation is important and necessary, but all skin folk aren't kin folk. There's a saying.
Interesting.
And that's also because over the years, we've seen how either deliberately or either manipulated by the state, deliberately, or just individually. Just because someone shares your identity does not mean they will fight for you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so that's just a reality of being human and in this world. And that's basically it. But I think there's more of a recognition and reflection of that. And maybe that needs to happen on the other side, as we say here in the States, with all of our sides on the other side.
Yeah. What do you feel is something that we maybe haven't talked about? Is there anything that you feel you want to, something I should have asked about?
Not really. I just hope that in this 2020 reflective moment that we're in, we can really see the world as a collective. We're going to need to, right, for climate change, but for other things as well. And that we can approach our issues and our differences with compassion. I know that's very idealistic, but it requires a culture shift, right? I wonder how power will shift, the distribution of power in the world, geopolitically. I hope that it becomes more distributed, and not just these few central poles of power. I hope that that within the U.S., the violence that comes from racism and this white supremacy, it doesn't. That's the fear I think that we all have. But we have to just work with compassion to make sure that doesn't ever come to a head again.
Yeah. Thank you, Crystal. So with this historical and community perspective in mind, let's move into a slightly more global conversation. For that, I spoke to Victor Menotti, who is Senior Fellow at the Oakland Institute and works with governments, businesses, and civil society on a range of economic and environmental issues. He currently lives with his family in Bratislava, Slovakia, and spoke to me from his home there in mid-November. Maybe we should start with you just saying a little bit about, your background and where you're coming from, sort of. Where do you feel like starting?
Well, that I come from California, and that I, born in San Diego, went to school in LA, and then lived in San Francisco for a long time, and went there to work on international environmental and economic issues, because there's such a vibrant community of organizations. The UN was found there, and I was drawn to that world of work, and quickly learned that it was about the economy, stupid, and that game wasn't in the UN, but it was in the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, what soon was to become the World Trade Organization. And so the global economic regime was sort of what my background has become, and working with a lot of farming, fishing, forest, and indigenous communities to amplify their voice and assert their rights in these global rulemaking processes. But the last decade or so, as the climate crisis has quickened, a lot of the energy has shifted into that space. And now it's about keeping it in the ground before we fry, and how, can we do it quickly, fast, and fair are the big sort of what I focus on now.
Great. So you're based in Bratislava at the moment in Slovakia, right? And what has been your sort of experience of this election, also seeing it kind of from afar a little bit?
How I see it from here in Central Europe is, Americans are seen as naive to think that, this can't happen there, that, nearby in Belarus and in Minsk, you have an authoritarian leader, strong man who's defied the election results. And it looks like almost any sort of cartoonish authoritarian regime around the world, and not what people have, thought of as the United States of America, and still do in this part of the world. They look to America for a lot, not, for security from Russia, and for, an example of democracy and how sort of self-rule is supposed to work. A lot of reasons that people in the region here look there. But the view from here is it just looks like things have really gone crazy for the past few years. And, it's like extremists are coming out of the woodwork all over the world. And it's like the nationalists, the nationalists are, reasserting their authoritarian tendencies. And it's amazing to see 70 million people, 70 million plus, vote for Trump in the US again. To think that sort of support is there for that type of leadership is really kind of scary, how I look at it from here. I think in many ways the polarization, it's a result of, the globalization of the economy, and the who won and who lost. And Democrats for decades ignored working class Americans losing their jobs. They were warned, climate change would worsen. They were warned. And, they've just failed to deliver, I think, on a serious agenda. But for many working class Americans, they, went with Trump because he was talking to them about these sort of issues and was seen as a way, a disruptor, but also a textbook authoritarian. And he won't go away. So this, maybe it's like a Berlusconi sort of setup from here on out, where, he comes back and he's sort of around. You can't get rid of him. Yeah, that's how politics is around here in the region. There are letting these oligarchs that sort of cycle through over the years, but Trump doesn't have too many left, so we'll still see what's left in him.
Yeah. So yeah, you started to say something there about how this massive support for Trump has to do with also the Democrats and the left not being able to pick up on what people are worried and concerned about. Could you say could you say something more about that? What were you referring to there?
Yeah, well, under the trade agreements that happened, Clinton, one of the first things he did was NAFTA and signed the WTO. They were previously negotiated by, Papa Bush, but ended the Cold War, and, U.S., a lot of the manufacturing base, which was the American middle class, has moved offshore to other low-wage, low-cost manufacturing countries, Mexico, China. And, there's like a global game of where you can move the sweatshop around, and sort of jurisdiction shopping, it's called. But, the consequences also for Europe have been quite severe. So that's one thing that the Democrats promised they would fight for, that they would take care of people who lost their jobs. They were not able to get the trade adjustment assistance, it's called, in U.S. legislation. Republicans, of course, wouldn't support it. And so people who lost their job and were promised retraining never got it delivered by Democrats or Republicans. So, both parties have hung them out to dry, but Trump has come along and picked up on it when the Democrats just had been hoping it would go away, or that they had it squelched within, the extremist part of their the progressive wing of the party. And it was a lot of the Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt, the industrial belt, where a lot of the industry was steel and so on, auto manufacturing, heart of American industry, heart of the fossil fuels economy was based. And so transitioning from that due to globalization and, the decarbonization that's quickening now, Trump was able to appeal to a base of supporters who, went with his message rather than what the Democrats have had to offer was just more of the same trade agreements and globalization policies that Trump denounces.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I remember being sort of active maybe around 10 years ago or so when I started studying in these organizations that were, that would place themselves on the left, that were very, very critical of globalization and very critical of at least the kind of globalization, which is what we're seeing, which is the kind of globalization that benefits corporations, that will allow for free flow of money and goods, but not free flow of people, right? And so it's kind of interesting to see that, that has been a criticism on the left. And now you see that's mostly only people on the right or a certain segment of the right that are talking about the problems of globalization. It's kind of interesting because I do feel like there might be different motivations behind that to some extent. Like maybe people who are critical of globalization on the right are also having a kind of nationalist framing for that, which can easily tip over into this kind of fascist tendencies where you're kind of trying to this America first sort of framing. Well, I guess what the left has been saying in terms of globalization has been this, people first and their local communities first, and that there needs to be sort of an international movement of solidarity between peoples in all countries that then people need to be sort of protected from losing power to affect their own lives and their own communities. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of interesting how you'd think that there would be more overlap, or like that it wouldn't be so hard for the left to find support in those groups that are experiencing the downsides of this very neoliberal form of globalization. But it seems like they're not seeing it. A lot of people then assume that it's that all kind of anything that smacks of something being global or international is bad, rather than this form of globalization that we're seeing that is bad.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be more overlap.
That people.
Well, just picking up on what you said, like you think there would be more overlap. I'm trying to think about where it sort of breaks down, or where there's overlap and where there could be more overlap. I'm thinking, and then like what you were saying, it so quickly goes nationalist and into kind of against Jewish conspiracy, George Soros.
Yeah.
And so it gets quickly seen within that frame, and they've sort of branded it. And, one place where I think we could push harder in that space is, let's look at the oligarchs. Let's look at the money and how power is organized within these different blocks. And I was going to say from, my experience of like in two attempts, I think with those, both in terms of U.S. fossil fuel power under the Koch brothers network of conservative, fossil fuel executives, wealthy billionaires, conservative businessmen's libertarian agenda, because the Kochs are for free trade and are globalist conservative corporate, but Trump had the critique of trade, of China, of the WTO, of the globalist agenda, and got, the working class white vote in those swing states of the upper Midwest the Rust Belt, so to speak, steel, coal, car country, the fossil fuel economy. And so in that way, they go together. Trump carries Koch's water when it comes to the carbon agenda and the climate, but they differ on other things like trade, like immigration, and so on.
Yeah, well, I think we'll say a bit more about that, because you did quite some extensive work on that a few years back, right? Where you were sort of mapping out how these billionaire Koch brothers have been funding American politics, and also how that relates to fossil fuels and climate change. So why don't you please say a bit more about what you found in that work?
Well, we found how the U.S. Political system, and the rules on spending for campaign finance, for directly to candidates, to outside groups, it's just really an unregulated space where oligarchs, have controlled and transformed the space of American elections. And Koch built up the most sophisticated network and sort of out-organized the Republican Party. And what you see now is, all the talent, all the money, all the data, all the candidates went to the Koch network, which has since contracted in the 4 years of Trump in a way, and morphed itself. But it showed really how the money can be organized to buy legislation. Where Koch is now is actually still something to be studied, because they sold their big tar sands assets up in Alberta, Canada, and one would think sort of de-risked themselves from climate in general and from the Keystone Pipeline not being approved. They've gotten a huge tax break from the Trump tax cuts. That was their big priority right after Trump got in. So they and their kids and their empires are fat and happy. They continue to be a force, and one has to hold them responsible for the authoritarian president that we've endured the past few years. So the Kochs, have gotten in bed with fascists before. Their father built the refineries for Hitler, also for Stalin. And so no problem lying down with these sort of people, because it's all about business and protecting their interests. And Trump has delivered in most ways for Koch.
It's interesting that there's kind of, Trump definitely, it's trying to sell himself as this kind of anti-establishment, anti-elite, when of course he's so completely in the economic elite. Whether or not he's in what we could call the political establishment or elite, that's a sort of different question. He definitely was. He definitely doesn't play by those same rules, and people sort of don't expect him to either, which is sort of interesting. And I guess I was just reflecting on that. It's interesting for people like the Koch brothers working with, or having somebody like Donald Trump in office is it's a sort of a dangerous gamble, because, his rhetoric is quite different to their libertarian, globalist sort of story. But at the same time, he is, since he himself is, in the top earners, he's obviously also going to be passing policies that will benefit people who are in the same economic category as himself. So they win in that way. But the question is, if their project is a long-term ideological one as well, it's kind of a dangerous gamble when it comes to a figure like Trump.
Yeah, well, you see in the chat there, I just sent you a thing from about Charles Koch's recent Wall Street Journal coverage about his book, where he said, boy, did we screw up, and expressing regret over fostering partisanship, the political polarization that we have today. And friends and family literally joke about the Civil War. There is sort of a covert Civil War that's racist, it's white supremacist, it's nationalist, and it's ongoing in the U.S. You saw it with with George Floyd, and continues to today with the people with weapons who are walking around the ballot boxes, and they're merged with special forces and local police, and there is something really. It's not just partisanship, but and now if you look, like I said, within the Republican Party, the collapse that's oncoming right now. We'll see where it goes, but it's there are long-term consequences to supporting fascists and authoritarians, and but that's like I think that's the point about Koch and about any oligarch, that these sort of people come and go, and somehow wealth and power, as it's organized in these sort of oligarchic forms of today, they sort of survive the coming and goings of demagogues and executives running administrations, even of superpowers like here. They're able to sort of straddle the parts of the political process and overcome them, survive them.
When things are, because I feel like we're also experiencing a time of a lot of shifts and transitions that in a lot of ways we're just not able to continue the level of resource and energy extraction that has kind of provided the material wealth of a small part of the population on the globe, and then the people who are kind of or there's a kind of expectation that should just continue, but it's not really possible, and probably not even desirable. But in those kinds of shifts, as things are maybe forced to change, and also more people wanting things to change, wanting the economic system to change, wanting politics to change, it's a time of it can lead to a lot of insecurity and fear, and also just people who finding that they feel trapped, like you said. And so it's hard to and to then be met with sort of ridicule by other people in that fear is maybe it's a recipe for disaster in some ways. Could you hear me all right when I said that?
I missed it. Recipe for
disaster.
Recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. It struck me, this is what's seeming to be happening everywhere, including China and Peru, and just corruption. People are just pissed off. And every week there's some other capital of, some country that's on fire because of corruption and protests. And it's happening in the US. It's been happening, on the streets have been filled because of corruption, police brutality and racism within the judicial process. The corruption, I think, is the issue that when you get to sort of what crosses over the left and right and where there's bridging, it's all these forces being marginalized, marginalized by, power and wealth as it's organized under these oligarchs, and as they use state systems to, enact policies that further promote themselves. And so, it's, poor white folks blaming poor brown folks for their poorer lot. And it's sort of classic textbook, it's happened before in history where then the authoritarian figures emerge. And so are we drifting towards war, or are we able to stop it and find another way? One has to ask, like, is there a way to stop this, and how do we do it? And so I feel like with Trump now, if he does go peacefully, we do have a chance to do that again. But it'll take a lot of hard work with Biden to make sure that he does the right thing. Because I think, those bridging issues like corruption, like trade and globalization and climate change and jobs, I think he is listening to some people who have ways to do those things differently than they've been done in decades past by the Democrats and by Republicans. So Democrats have a chance to deliver, and will they do it is sort of what the exciting opportunity is of the moment right now. Have they learned, or is this going to get even worse? We have to continue to try to get them to do the right thing. And I think just to transition a bit into what this means for now, if I could do that,
Please do.
Well, I mean, Biden, just listening again to his final debate and what he's talking about, transitioning from oil, I think he understands the science, he understands the justice, and he understands the need. It's a decades-long, thing that needs to be done, but it has to begin now. And he has some specific targets with dates, and understands that it's not just in the way he talks about it, ending oil. He wouldn't say ban fracking, but he talked about transitioning from oil, and that implies reduced production. But the U.S. is now the top producer in the world, and Trump takes a lot of credit for that, but it was actually started under Obama and Biden when it really took off, and they certainly helped to facilitate it. So it's hard to imagine how Biden, as the guy who kind of was a big booster of it, is going to somehow rein it in. He's saying he won't ban it, but he wants to transition from oil. The Biden plan should have a just transition plan for oil. And, that's sort of where I'm leaning into now.
So it's been really divisive time, especially these last few years in the States. And do you think that, more unity is both desirable, and is it desirable and possible? And how do we get to that in that case?
Unity is desirable and it's possible, I think, by addressing the issues of, economic inequality, corruption, and, the climate crisis and the racial justice crisis. I think all these things can come together and, and be attacked with solutions that are comprehensive and really transform the systems by creating jobs, in areas that need them the most, and supporting workers to transition from fossil fuels. And I think there's kind of something for a lot of the key constituencies here to build the power base and drive through the agenda that the world needs, America to do to reduce its emissions. It's increasingly few people who are standing in the way, and it's a painfully disastrous and violent process to, isolate them. But that's where it continues to go. And the last one standing, we have to see that there are ever fewer, and those holding the assets, the carbon, those soon to be stranded assets, are looking for exits themselves. So how to make that happen again in a way that's fast and fair is what I think is really key. And I see ways that we can bring people together on doing that for sure.
What do you feel most excited about for the upcoming couple of years for you yourself? Like, what do you feel most excited about working on?
I'm excited that we got a president who said he wants to transition from oil over time. But that, he ran on that. And I feel like his mandate, we have to make sure that happens, hold it to him and provide him with a plan that's just and fair and fast and transparent and, driven by principles of the climate convention. And that we have a vice president, who ran on a platform calling for managed decline of oil. So, I think they do understand the ecological issues and the justice issues, and that's what they front loaded. So I'm excited about, that's a very different effort, a different battle, a different push than it was with President Trump for the past 4 years.
You'll find resources from Crystal and Victor in the show notes. Our theme music, as always, is by Christian Stan at stoneproduction.no. Thank you to our patrons and everyone who supports the show. It means so much to us. And I'll speak to you next time.